A beat. Nicholas Sterling, a perfection-obsessed tycoon, crosses paths with Aurora Mendez, a clumsy maid and the butt of jokes. During a hotel inspection, Aurora accidentally spills coffee all over Nicholas. She anticipates the boss's fury, but instead of anger, he feels a strange curiosity. Seeing Aurora's shame and awkward beauty, the tycoon doesn't see the disastrous maid, but a unique soul that fascinates him and awakens an unexpected passion. But before we reveal what happens next, if you're moved by stories like this, click to subscribe now and help us bring more tales of courage and loyalty. Thank you. And now let's see what happened. The deafening noise of the vacuum cleaner echoed through the hallway of the 15th floor of the Grand Palace Hotel, one of the most luxurious establishments in New York City. Aurora Mendez pushed the cleaning cart with determination, her dark, brown hair pulled back in a messy bun that kept threatening to unravel with every jerky movement. At 26, she had learned that life wasn't generous to those born in the outskirts of the Bronx. But that never stopped her from dreaming. "Aurora, you forgot to change the towels in Suite 1507, barked Donna Carmen, the floor supervisor, her raspy voice cutting through the air like a razor. "And watch out for that antique vase in the hallway. If you break anything else this month, it's coming out of your paycheck." Aurora sighed, adjusting the navy blue skirt of her uniform that always seemed too big on her petite frame. She knew her reputation at the hotel wasn't the best. In the last 3 months, she had broken 2 porcelain cups, knocked over a flower arrangement in the lobby, and, in a memorable disaster, tripped on the service stairs carrying a tray of champagne, staining the entire Persian rug on the executive floor. But she needed this job. Her salary as a maid was what kept her and her grandmother, Grandma Eula, in their small 2-room apartment. "Yes, Donna Carmen," Aurora mumbled, pushing the cart toward the presidential suite. Her brown eyes sparkled with a quiet determination. She might be clumsy, but she was never lazy. Every room she cleaned received her full attention. Every detail was taken care of with care, as if it were her own home. Meanwhile, 40 miles away, in a private helicopter cutting through the gray sky above Manhattan, Nicholas Sterling observed the cityscape through the window with critical and calculating eyes. At 38, he had built a hotel empire that spanned 3 continents. Sterling Hotels and Resorts was synonymous with luxury and perfection, and each property was an extension of his meticulous personality. "Mr. Sterling," said Marcus, his executive assistant, consulting the tablet, "the inspection at the Grand Palace is scheduled to begin at 2:30 p.m. We have the occupancy reports, cost spreadsheets, and guest reviews from the last 6 months." Nicholas nodded briefly, adjusting the cuff of his impeccably ironed Italian shirt. His black hair was perfectly combed, and even after a 12-hour flight from London, his appearance betrayed no sign of fatigue. He had learned early on that perfection was not an accident, but a daily choice. A choice that had cost him 3 failed relationships and a loneliness he preferred not to admit. "I want to see every floor, every suite. If there is anything below Sterling standard, I want to know," said Nicholas, his voice carrying that cold authority that made managers tremble. The helicopter landed on the hotel helipad at 2:15 p.m. Nicholas descended with precise movements, his Italian leather shoes tapping the concrete with determination. He didn't know that 15 floors below, Aurora Mendez was at that very moment spilling disinfectant water in the executive hallway, trying to remove a stubborn stain from the carpet. The inspection began in the basement, passed through the kitchens, the event rooms, and gradually climbed through the floors. Nicholas found small imperfections here and there, a chandelier with a burnt-out bulb, an almost imperceptible stain on a leather armchair, a flower arrangement that didn't exactly follow the Sterling standard. Each observation was noted in his small black leather notebook. Aurora, oblivious to the hurricane approaching, hummed a pop tune while preparing the tea and coffee cart for the presidential suite. It was a hotel tradition to serve an afternoon snack to VIP guests, and she had been assigned this special task. Her hands trembled slightly with nervousness. The china was too expensive for her maid budget. "You got this, Aurora," she muttered to herself, arranging the cups on the silver tray. "Just go up, deliver, and come down. Simple as that." Nicholas and his entourage had reached the 15th floor when Aurora emerged from the service elevator, carefully carrying the tray. The hallway was silent, except for the muffled sound of her footsteps on the plush carpet. She didn't see the group of men in suits approaching from the other end of the hall, absorbed as she was in not spilling a drop of the freshly brewed coffee. Fate, sometimes, has a cruel sense of humor. Or maybe it's just Murphy's Law applied to love. Aurora was a few feet from the presidential suite when her right foot found exactly the only loose board on the floor under the carpet, a defect that had gone unnoticed by all previous inspections. Her ankle twisted, her balance was lost, and the tray with coffee, tea, cookies, and fine china flew in a perfect arc through the air. Nicholas Sterling, who at that moment was pointing out a small scratch on the wallpaper to Marcus, turned just in time to receive the entire contents of the tray on his white linen shirt, silk tie, and tailored blazer. The hot coffee went through, the fine fabric reaching his skin, while the cookies scattered across the floor like unwanted confetti. For a moment that seemed eternal, silence reigned absolute in the hallway. Aurora, still on the floor where she had fallen, looked in horror at the scene of destruction she had created. Her eyes filled with tears of shame and panic. There she was, once again, destroying everything she touched. But this time, she had destroyed the clothes of the most powerful man in the hotel, the man who, she now realized with growing terror, was the owner of all that majesty. Nicholas Sterling, in turn, remained motionless, coffee dripping from his tie, looking at the young woman on the floor with an expression that no one could decipher. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Aurora trying to get up, her hands shaking as she picked up the pieces of china scattered across the floor. Tears of shame streamed down her flushed face, and she couldn't bring herself to meet the eyes of the man she had just ruined. I'm so sorry, sir," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "Please forgive me. I'll pay for your clothes, I promise. You can deduct it from my paycheck, however many months it takes." Marcus and the other executives remained frozen, waiting for the explosion of fury that was sure to come. They all knew Nicholas Sterling's reputation, his intolerance for imperfections, his coldness towards incompetent employees. This clumsy maid was clearly fired, possibly sued. But Nicholas said nothing. For reasons he himself couldn't understand, he found himself studying the young woman's face with a strange curiosity. There was something in the way she apologized, a desperate sincerity that he hadn't seen in years in his world of flatterers and opportunists. When she finally raised her eyes to meet his, he was struck by an unexpected intensity. Those brown eyes didn't lie, didn't calculate, didn't pretend. They were just real. "What's your name?" he asked finally, his voice softer than anyone in the hallway expected. "Aurora, sir. Aurora Mendez," she replied, surprised by the question rather than the summary dismissal. "Aurora," Nicholas repeated as if testing the name. Something in the way he pronounced it made her heart race in a disconcerting way. "Are you hurt?" The concern in his voice caught her completely off guard. She looked at her ankle, which was throbbing, but shook her head. "No, sir. I'm fine." Nicholas took off his stained blazer and handed it to Marcus, who received it as if it were a bomb about to explode. "Get me some clean clothes and get someone to clean this up," he ordered, but his eyes remained fixed on Aurora. "What about the employee, sir?" asked Marcus, certain that he was sealing the young woman's professional fate. "She'll stay," Nicholas said simply. "Aurora, come to my temporary office in an hour. We need to talk." Aurora felt the world spin around her. She wasn't fired, at least not yet, but the prospect of a private conversation with Nicholas Sterling was almost as terrifying as being fired. "Yes, sir," she murmured. As Nicholas and his entourage walked away, Aurora remained in the hallway, trying to process what had happened. Donna Carmen appeared like a hurricane, having heard about the incident through the employee gossip network. "Aurora Mendez, have you gone crazy, spilling coffee on the hotel owner himself?" she shouted, her eyes flashing with indignation. "Pack your things, you're fired." "Actually, she's not," said a firm voice behind them. It was Marcus, who had returned. Mr. Sterling was very clear. Miss Mendez is to report to his office at 4:30 p.m. Donna Carmen paled. In her 15 years at the Grand Palace, she had never seen Nicholas Sterling show clemency to an incompetent employee. There was something very strange going on. During the next hour, Aurora wandered through the hotel like a ghost. The other employees looked at her with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. Some whispered theories. Maybe the boss wanted to publicly humiliate her before firing her, or maybe he planned to sue her for property damage. Nicholas, meanwhile, had changed and was trying to focus on the financial reports, but his mind kept returning to those brown eyes and the way Aurora had apologized. There was something about her that intrigued him, an authenticity that contrasted sharply with the artificial world he lived in. Beautiful and sophisticated women threw themselves at his feet regularly, but none had caused that strange feeling of curiosity. At 4:30 p.m. sharp, Aurora timidly knocked on the door of the temporary office. "Come in," said Nicholas, and his voice sent an inexplicable shiver down her spine. The office was an extension of his personality, impeccable, organized, intimidating. Nicholas was sitting behind a mahogany desk, even more imposing without the blazer. The sleeves of his shirt rolled up, revealing defined forearms. Aurora kept her eyes down, her hands clasped nervously. "Sit down," he said, pointing to the chair in front of him. "How long have you worked here, Aurora?" 8 months, sir," she replied, her voice a thread. "And does this kind of accident happen often?" Aurora felt her face burn. Yes, sir. I'm a little clumsy, but I try hard, I swear. I always try to do my best." Nicholas leaned back, in his chair, studying her. "Why do you work here? What's your story?" The question caught her off guard. No one had ever been interested in her story. I need to take care of my grandmother. She has diabetes and heart problems. The pay here is better than in the other places where I've tried to work." "And your parents?" "My father abandoned us when I was 10. My mother died in a car accident 2 years later. Grandma Eula, my grandmother, raised me alone." There was a quiet dignity in the way she told her story, without self-pity, just facts. Nicholas found himself admiring her resilience. "Listen, Aurora," he said finally, "I'm going to make you a proposition. I need someone to take care of my personal office and the presidential suite during my stay. Someone I can trust to maintain discretion about my business. The pay would be significantly better than your current one." Aurora looked up, surprised. "But sir, I'm clumsy. You saw what happened today." "I did," said Nicholas, an almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "But I also saw how you reacted. You took responsibility, didn't try to dodge or blame other people. That's worth more than technical perfection." I accept, sir, thank you." "Great. Start tomorrow at 7 in the morning. And Aurora?" She looked at him, expectant. "Call me Nicholas when we're alone." When Aurora left the office, Nicholas remained motionless for long minutes. There was something deeply disturbing in the way that young woman affected him. He, who controlled empires and negotiated millions without batting an eye, felt destabilized by a clumsy maid. On the other side of the door, Aurora leaned against the wall, her heart pounding erratically. She didn't understand what had happened in that room, but she knew that her life had changed irrevocably. There was something in Nicholas Sterling's gaze, an intensity, a hidden loneliness that made her want to understand the man behind the perfect facade. Neither of them imagined that Marcus, outside the office, had overheard part of the conversation and was already mentally drafting a report for the Sterling family in London. A clumsy maid working directly for Nicholas was a novelty that would certainly interest many people. The next morning, Aurora arrived on the executive floor 15 minutes early, determined to give him no reason to regret his decision. She had spent the night awake, alternating between anxiety and a strange anticipation she couldn't name. Grandma Eula had insisted that she take some of her famous homemade French toast to sweeten up the boss, she had said with a mischievous grin. Nicholas was already in his office when she arrived, hunched over documents that seemed never to dwindle. Without his blazer, the impeccable white shirt highlighted the breadth of his shoulders, and Aurora found herself observing the concentrated lines of his face before she realized what she was doing. "Good morning," she said timidly, carrying her cleaning supplies. He looked up, and for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. They simply looked at each other. "Good morning, Aurora. You can start with the sweet. I have a few calls to make." For the next 2 hours, Aurora worked with an almost obsessive dedication. Every surface was polished until it shone, every object replaced with millimeter precision. She had realized that Nicholas was a man of details, and she was determined not to give him any room for criticism. It was while organizing the desk drawers, a task he had specifically requested, that she found the photograph. It was an old, faded image of a boy of perhaps 8 years old, next to a beautiful woman with blonde hair. The boy had the same intense eyes as Nicholas, but there was something different in his expression, an innocence, a joy that the man she knew did not possess. "You shouldn't be touching that." Nicholas's voice behind her made her jump. The photograph slipped from her hands, but he caught it before it touched the floor, his fingers brushing hers for an instant that made her shiver. "Sorry," Aurora mumbled. "I didn't mean to. I was just organizing." Nicholas looked at the photograph with an expression she couldn't decipher. "That's my mother," he said finally, his voice lower. "Isabella Sterling." "She's beautiful," Aurora said sincerely. "You look a lot like her." "Did," Nicholas corrected, carefully putting the photo away. "She died when I was 12. There was an old pain in his voice, a wound that Aurora recognized from carrying a similar one. "I'm sorry," she said. "I lost my mother early too." Nicholas looked at her in surprise. He rarely talked about Isabella, and never with employees. But there was something about Aurora. Perhaps the sincerity of her condolence, perhaps the fact that she understood the loss, that made him lower his defenses. "How did she die?" Aurora asked softly, then blushed. "Sorry, it's none of my business." "Cancer," Nicholas said abruptly. 2 years of treatments, false hopes, medical promises that weren't kept. My father, he was never the same after that." Aurora didn't say anything, but her brown eyes filled with an understanding he didn't expect to find. She simply stood there, offering a silent presence that strangely comforted him. "And yours?" he asked, surprising himself with his own interest. "Car accident," Aurora replied. "A rainy night. She was coming back from her second job, a drunk driver." Her voice faltered, but she quickly recovered. "Grandma Eula always says she died fighting to give us a better life." Nicholas found himself studying her face, the way she spoke of her mother with love instead of bitterness, how she transformed pain into strength. It was something he had never been able to do with his own losses. "You mentioned that your father abandoned you," he said, sitting on the edge of the desk, an unusual proximity that made Aurora's heart race. "He said he couldn't handle the responsibility anymore," Aurora explained, her hands busy folding a non-existent handkerchief. "One morning we woke up and he was gone. He left a note saying it was better this way." "How old were you?" 10. Nicholas felt an unexpected anger towards the man who had abandoned a child. "And you never heard from him again?" Aurora shook her head. "Grandma Eula says some men aren't born to stay, that there's no point in holding a grudge against someone who doesn't know how to love." The simple wisdom of the words hit Nicholas unexpectedly. He had spent years holding not only a grudge, but a deep bitterness for the way life had taken everything that mattered to him. "Your grandmother seems to be a wise woman," he commented. Aurora's face lit up with a smile that completely transformed her appearance. "She's the strongest person I know. She worked as a seamstress all her life to raise me, never complained, never made me feel like a burden. And that's why you work so hard to take care of her now." "It's the least I can do," Aurora said simply. "She gave me everything she had." Nicholas found himself admiring that loyalty, that ability to reciprocate love with love. In his world, people approached him out of self-interest, for status, for money. Aurora's genuine devotion to her grandmother was something he hadn't seen in years. "Can I ask why you never got married?" Aurora asked impulsively, then widened her eyes, horrified at her own audacity. "Sorry, I shouldn't have." "It's okay," said Nicholas, surprised that he wasn't bothered by the question. "I never found someone who was real." "Real?" "Someone who wanted me for who I am, not for what I have," he explained, his eyes meeting hers. "In my world, Aurora, people wear masks, always. It must be lonely," she said softly. The simple observation hit him like a punch. No one had ever seen his loneliness so clearly, much less an employee who barely knew him. "It is," he admitted, his voice almost a whisper. They remained silent for a moment, the intimacy of the confession hanging between them like something tangible. Aurora felt as if she were seeing for the first time the man behind the mask of power, and the vulnerability she saw moved her deeply. "Mr. Nicholas," she said finally, "can I give you some advice from Grandma Eula?" He nodded, curious. "She always says that the right people show up when we least expect it, in the most unlikely places. And that true love doesn't look at bank accounts. It looks at the heart." Nicholas studied her intensely, as if seeing something in her that he hadn't noticed before. There was a wisdom in that young woman that contrasted with her apparent simplicity, a depth that he didn't find in the sophisticated women of his social circle. "And you believe in that?" he asked. "I need to believe," Aurora replied honestly. "Otherwise, what would be the point of anything?" At that moment, Nicholas Sterling realized he was in dangerous territory. This clumsy maid was penetrating defenses he had built over decades, making him feel things he had sworn never to feel again. And the most terrifying part was that he didn't want her to stop. 3 days later, Nicholas had established a routine that surprised him. He arrived at the office earlier, prolonged his meetings, and found excuses to stay at the hotel longer than necessary. Aurora's presence had become a comforting constant. Her careful way of arranging his papers, the coffee always at the perfect temperature, and those moments of conversation that became increasingly longer and more personal. Thursday, a violent thunderstorm hit New York City. The winds howled against the windows of the 15th floor, and the rain hammered the glass with an intensity that made the building tremble subtly. Nicholas was in a video conference with investors from Tokyo when the lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. "Crap," he muttered in the dark, hearing the distinctive sound of the emergency generators failing to kick in. It was exactly the kind of situation that could ruin multi-million-dollar deals. "Mr. Nicholas?" came Aurora's worried voice from across the room. She had been organizing the files when the storm cut the power. "I'm here," he replied, his voice more tense than he intended. "Stay where you are. I'll try to find a flashlight." But the moment he stood up, a particularly intense bolt of lightning illuminated the sky, followed immediately by a deafening thunderclap that made the windows vibrate. The sound was so sudden and violent that Aurora let out an involuntary scream, and trying to get away from the window, tripped over a chair. Nicholas heard her fall, and guided only by memory and the brief flashes of lightning, moved towards the sound. "Aurora, are you okay?" I think so," came her trembling voice. "Sorry, I'm a little afraid of storms." He found her on the floor, leaning against the wall, and when another lightning flash lit up the room for an instant, he saw that she was shaking. Without thinking, he knelt beside her. "Hey, it's okay," he said, his hand finding her shoulder. "In the dark. It's just a storm." "I know it's silly," Aurora murmured, her voice choked, "but ever since my mother died on that rainy night, I get terrified of bad weather." The vulnerable confession hit him like a punch to the chest. In the dark, away from judgmental eyes and social conventions, there were just the two of them. A man and a woman sharing fears and frailties. "It's not silly," Nicholas said softly, his hand moving to caress her hair. "We all have our demons." Another thunderclap exploded above them, and Aurora cringed instinctively. Without hesitation, Nicholas pulled her into his arms, and she nestled against his chest, seeking comfort. He smelled the soft fragrance of her hair, the soft texture of her skin, and something inside him crumbled completely. "Tell me about her," he whispered. "About your mother." In the dark, with the storm raging outside, Aurora began to speak. She told about the nights when her mother came home late from her 2 jobs, but always found the energy to help her with her homework. About the Sundays when they made cookies together, even when they barely had money for the ingredients. About how she sang while cleaning the house, turning mundane tasks into moments of joy. "She used to say that I was her greatest treasure," Aurora murmured against his chest, "that no matter how hard the world was, because she had me." Nicholas felt something break inside him, the way she spoke of maternal love, of the feeling of being the center of someone's world, awakened a deep longing for his own mother, for the happy years before the illness, before everything fell apart. "My mother used to tell me stories," he said unexpectedly, his voice hoarse in the darkness. "She invented whole worlds where we were princes, and she was the wisest queen. She said that one day I would be a just and kind king." "And you are," said Aurora softly. "Look what you've built, how many people you employ." "A cold king," Nicholas corrected bitterly, exactly the opposite of what she dreamed. "That's not true," Aurora insisted, raising her face to look at him in the dark. "You gave me a chance when everyone expected you to fire me. You listened to my story, you cared about my grandmother." Their faces were inches apart. Nicholas could feel her warm breath against his skin, and something primitive and irresistible took hold of him. Slowly, his hands found her face, and he murmured her name like a prayer. "Aurora." "Yes," she whispered, and it wasn't an answer to a question, but a complete surrender. When he kissed her, it was as if the world exploded in liquid fire. It wasn't a soft or hesitant kiss, but a desperate fusion of 2 lonely hearts who had found each other in the middle of the storm. Aurora melted against him, her hands intertwining in his hair, and Nicholas pulled her closer, as if he wanted to absorb her completely. They kissed with the hunger of those who had spent years in the emotional desert, with the passion of those who knew that this moment might be unique and unrepeatable. The storm outside was nothing compared to the hurricane that had unleashed. Between them, when they finally separated, breathless, reality began to slowly seep into the bubble of intimacy they had created. "Nicholas," Aurora sighed, and the way she said his name was like a caress. "I know," he said, resting his forehead against hers. "I know this is crazy. What are we going to do?" Before he could answer, the lights came back on abruptly, flooding the office with a cruel clarity that made them blink and pull away instinctively. The magic of the moment shattered like glass, and they were confronted with the stark reality of their positions. Nicholas Sterling, multi-millionaire tycoon, had just kissed a maid in his office. Aurora Mendez, a poor young woman from the outskirts of the Bronx, had surrendered herself to the arms of the most unattainable man in her world. His phone began to ring insistently. Probably Marcus, worried about the power outage and the interrupted business. At the same time, urgent knocks echoed on the door, the maintenance team checking if everything was okay with the boss. "Mr. Sterling, is everything all right in there?" shouted a voice from the hallway. Nicholas looked at Aurora, who had moved away and was nervously arranging her disheveled hair. The moment of absolute intimacy was over, but its consequences were just beginning. "We're fine," he replied, his professional voice returning automatically. But his eyes remained fixed on Aurora, and she knew, with absolute certainty, that nothing would ever be the same. When she left the office minutes later, trying to appear composed, she didn't see Marcus watching her from the elevators with a calculating smile. He had arrived just in time to see her disheveled hair, her swollen lips, the way she touched her own lips unconsciously. Information like that was worth gold in the corporate world of the Sterlings, and Marcus knew exactly who to call first. In the days following the kiss, an electric tension hung between Nicholas and Aurora. They moved around each other like careful dancers, each gesture loaded with meaning, each glance an unspoken promise. Nicholas found excuses to touch her hand when handing over documents. Aurora lingered longer than necessary, organizing his things, and when their voices became intimate whispers, the outside world simply ceased to exist. The following Monday, everything changed. Nicholas was in his office when Marcus entered without knocking, carrying a tablet and a somber expression. "Mr. Sterling, we need to talk. In private." Aurora, who was folding towels in the adjoining bathroom, sensed the urgent tone of the executive assistant's voice and instinctively remained silent, listening. "What happened?" asked Nicholas, noticing the tension on Marcus's face. "We received a call from London. Your Aunt Margaret is coming to the States. She arrives tomorrow." Nicholas paled. Margaret Sterling was the ruthless matriarch of the family, the woman who had taken control of the business after the death of his father and who considered her nephew an extension of her own ambitions. Why? No visit was scheduled. "Someone informed her about certain irregularities in your stay here," Marcus said carefully. "About your proximity to a specific employee." Nicholas's blood froze. "Who?" "That doesn't matter now. What matters is that she's coming accompanied by Victoria Ashworth." Victoria, the name came out like a muffled groan. Victoria Ashworth was the daughter of one of Sterling Hotel's largest investors, a London socialite of classic beauty and clear ambitions. Margaret had orchestrated an engagement between them 2 years ago, an arrangement that Nicholas had managed to repeatedly postpone. "They're staying in the royal suite for a week," Marcus continued, "and your aunt was very specific about her expectations for this visit." From the bathroom, Aurora felt her world crumble word by word. A fiancé. He had an arranged fiancé, a woman from his own world, suited to his standards. She pressed her hand against her mouth to keep from making a sound, tears burning in her eyes. "Marcus, this can't be happening now," said Nicholas, running his hands through his hair. "I need time." "Time for what, sir? To decide between a multi-billion-dollar empire and a maid?" Marcus's voice was cold, calculating. "Because that's what we're talking about. Your aunt made it very clear that if this involvement continues, there will be consequences for the family business." "She can't blackmail me," said Nicholas, but his voice lacked conviction. "She can and will," replied Marcus. "She controls 40% of Sterling Hotel's stock, and Victoria isn't just coming as a suitor. She's coming as a representative of the Ashworth investments, which account for another 30% of the company. Do the math, Mr. Sterling." The silence that followed was deafening. Aurora closed her eyes, feeling each word like a stab wound. She knew it had been a fantasy to believe that someone like Nicholas Sterling could choose her over his empire. "And there's more," continued Marcus, his voice taking on an almost sadistic tone. "Your aunt has already arranged an investigation into Miss Mendez. Complete background, family history, financial situation." "You had no right!" Nicholas exploded. "I had a duty to protect the interests of the company," Marcus retorted coldly, "and we found something interesting. Miss Mendez's father didn't simply abandon the family. He was arrested for fraud and tax evasion 3 months after leaving. He's been serving a sentence for 15 years. Aurora felt her legs buckle. Grandma Eula had lied to protect her, invented the story of abandonment, to spare her the pain of the truth. Her father hadn't just left, he was a criminal. "That doesn't change anything," said Nicholas, but his voice sounded less firm. "Doesn't it? The media would love this story. Tycoon involved with daughter of convict. Imagine what that would do to Sterling Hotel's image, your international investors, your elite clients. They won't want to associate their brands with that kind of scandal." Nicholas remained silent for long minutes. Aurora could hear his heavy breathing through the wall, and she knew he was calculating, weighing consequences, doing exactly what a businessman would do. "What does my aunt want?" he asked finally. "That you stay away from the employee immediately, that you announce your engagement to Victoria within 3 days, and that you prove you can be the heir she always wanted, someone who puts business above personal whims. And if I refuse, she withdraws the family investments and convinces the Ashworths to do the same. Sterling Hotels wouldn't survive. Thousands of jobs would be lost. Everything your father built, everything you fought to expand, would disappear." Aurora couldn't take it anymore. Silently, she slipped through the back door of the bathroom, exiting into the service hallway. Her tears were falling freely now, and she ran to the elevator before anyone saw her. Back in the office, Nicholas remained motionless, his shoulders slumped by the weight of impossible choices. "There's one last thing, sir," said Marcus, his voice taking on an almost gentle tone. "Miss Mendez doesn't need to suffer unnecessarily. We can arrange a transfer to one of our hotels in another city, with a promotion and a significant salary increase. She would never know about the details about her father. It would be a way to protect her." Nicholas looked up, and Marcus saw in his eyes a pain he had never witnessed before. "You're asking me to choose between her and everything I've built. I'm saying that choices are sometimes made for us, Mr. Sterling, and that smart men know when to accept reality." That night, Aurora couldn't sleep. Lying on the small bed she shared with Grandma Eula, she looked at the ceiling and tried to process everything she had heard. Her father was a criminal. Nicholas had a fiancée. She was an obstacle to his empire. But the part that hurt the most wasn't the revelations or the threats. It was the memory of Nicholas's silence when confronted with the choice. The time he had taken to answer. The hesitation that had been in his voice, because deep down, Aurora knew what his choice would be. And she knew that when the sun rose, The man who had kissed her with such passion during the storm would be just a painful memory of something that could never have been real. Across town, in his luxury penthouse, Nicholas Sterling remained, awake on the balcony, looking at the lights of New York City and wondering how he had allowed his heart to open again, only to discover that some differences are too great to be overcome by love. The next morning, Aurora arrived at the hotel with swollen eyes and a broken heart. She had made a decision during the early hours. If Nicholas didn't have the courage to choose, she would make the choice for both of them. She would hand in her resignation and disappear from his life before he was forced to hurt her even more. But when she arrived on the 15th floor, she found the executive hallway in a frenetic state. Employees were running back and forth, exotic flowers were being arranged, and a red carpet was being rolled out from the main elevator to the presidential suite. Margaret Sterling had arrived earlier than expected. Aurora had barely set foot on the floor when a cutting voice echoed through the hallway. "You must be the famous Aurora Mendez." Aurora turned and found an imposing woman of about 60 years old, dressed in an impeccable Chanel suit, silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun, and blue eyes that seemed capable of freezing blood. Beside her was a stunning blonde young woman, all perfect curves and practiced smile, obviously Victoria Ashworth. "Miss Sterling," Aurora murmured, making an awkward bow. "Oh, no need to feign respect," said Margaret with an icy smile. "I know exactly who you are and what you're trying to do with my nephew." Aurora felt her face burn. "I'm not trying to do anything, ma'am. I'm just an employee." "An employee who seduces her boss, you mean?" replied Margaret, her voice dripping with contempt. "An employee whose family has an interesting history." Aurora's blood froze. "What do you mean?" Victoria laughed, a crystalline and cruel sound. "Oh, honey, you didn't know. How delicious. Tell her, Aunt Margaret." "Your father, Aurora Mendez, is serving a 20-year sentence for grand larceny, tax evasion and money laundering," said Margaret with sadistic pleasure. "He cheated dozens of working families, stole their savings, destroyed entire lives, a low-life criminal." Aurora felt the world spin around her. Tears began to roll down her face, but she forced herself to remain standing. That has nothing to do with me, doesn't it?" "The press will think differently," said Victoria, pulling her cell phone out of her purse. "Imagine the headlines. Sterling heir involved with daughter of convict. Tycoon in love with potential criminal." "I'm not a criminal," Aurora whispered. "Of course not, dear," said Margaret with false compassion. "You're just a young opportunist who saw a chance to climb the ladder at the expense of a vulnerable man. But that ends today." At that moment, the elevator doors opened and Nicholas emerged, accompanied by Marcus. He stopped abruptly at the sight, Aurora in tears, his aunt and Victoria surrounding her like predators. "Aunt Margaret," he said, his voice controlled but dangerous. "What's going on here?" "Just clarifying a few things for Miss Mendez," replied Margaret calmly. "About the realities of her world versus ours." Nicholas looked at Aurora and saw the absolute pain in her eyes. He took a step towards her, but Margaret intercepted him. "Nicholas, darling, I need to speak with you, in private, now." "No," said Nicholas firmly. "Anything you have to say can be said in front of Aurora." Margaret smiled coldly. "Very well. Victoria, show him." Victoria held her cell phone towards Nicholas, displaying a series of photographs. They were images of him and Aurora during the storm, clearly taken through the office window. Intimate, compromising images that left no doubt about what had happened between them. "How did you get these?" asked Nicholas, his voice low and dangerous. "Let's just say we have our methods," said Margaret, "and these photos will be in every tabloid in the States and Europe tomorrow, unless you make the right decision." Aurora looked at the photographs and felt violated, exposed. Her most intimate moments with Nicholas had been turned into weapons against them. "What's your proposal?" asked Nicholas, although Aurora could see that he already knew the answer. "Simple," said Margaret. "You announce your engagement to Victoria tonight, at the welcome party I've arranged. You marry her within 6 months, and you never see or speak to this person again. And if I refuse, the photos are published. I withdraw all the family investments in sterling. The Ashworths do the same. The company collapses in a matter of weeks. Thousands of people lose their jobs. And Miss Mendez here," she pointed at Aurora as if she were an insect, "becomes the most hated woman in the States. The gold digger who destroyed an empire." Aurora let out a broken sob. I never wanted this." "Of course you did," said Victoria cruelly. "Girls like you always do. They think they can seduce rich men and escape their pathetic lives." "Stop!" said Nicholas, his voice sharp as a blade. "The truth hurts, doesn't it, darling?" said Margaret. "But you need to wake up to reality. This girl will never be accepted into our world. She's an embarrassment, a stain on our reputation. And you know it." Nicholas looked at Aurora, and she saw the war raging in his eyes, saw the exact moment when the businessman won over the man in love. "Aurora," he said, his voice formal and distant, "maybe it's best if you take some time off. Marcus can arrange a transfer to one of our hotels in another city." The words were like a slap in the face. Aurora stared at him, searching for some sign of the man who had kissed her with such passion, but found only the cold mask of the tycoon. "I understand," she said, her voice barely audible. "I understand perfectly." She turned to leave, but Margaret wasn't finished. "Oh, and Miss Mendez, if you try to contact my nephew again, or if you appear at any Sterling family event, or if you try to sell your story to the press, I'll make sure that you and your dear grandmother never find work anywhere again. I'm very good at destroying lives when necessary." Aurora stopped, trembling, with anger and humiliation. She turned slowly, looking at each of those people who had conspired to destroy her. But it was to Nicholas that she addressed her last words. "You know what's saddest about all of this?" she said, her voice gaining a surprising strength. "It's not the fact that you chose money over love. It's the fact that you've become exactly the kind of man your mother would be ashamed to call her son." The blow hit Nicholas like a shot to the chest. He watched Aurora walk away, her shoulders erect despite the tears, and knew that he had just destroyed the only real thing he had found in his life. "Well," said Margaret with satisfaction, "that was easier than I imagined. Victoria, darling, let's discuss the details of your engagement." As they walked away, Nicholas remained motionless in the hallway, staring at the elevator where Aurora had disappeared. Marcus approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It was the right decision, sir, the only possible decision." But when Nicholas closed his eyes, all he could see was Aurora's face, first radiant with happiness during the kiss, then destroyed by betrayal. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that he had just committed the biggest mistake of his life. Across town, Aurora ran through the streets of the Bronx, tears blinding her vision. When she finally arrived home, she found Grandma Eula waiting for her at the door, as if she knew that something terrible had happened. "My child," murmured the elderly woman, opening her arms. Aurora collapsed in her grandmother's arms, telling her everything, about Nicholas, about her father, about the threats and the humiliation. Grandma Eula listened in silence, stroking her granddaughter's hair. "Grandma," Aurora sobbed, "why didn't you ever tell me the truth about my father?" "Because some truths are burdens too heavy for a child to carry," said Grandma Eula softly, "and because you are not responsible for his sins." "But they're right. I'll never belong in his world." "My dear girl," said Grandma Eula, lifting Aurora's face to look her in the eyes. Worlds can be changed, but men who choose money over love, those never change. That night, while Aurora cried herself to sleep in her grandmother's arms, Nicholas Sterling announced his engagement to Victoria Ashworth at a lavish party at the Grand Palace Hotel. To the outside world, it was the perfect union between two powerful dynasties. But everyone who looked into the groom's eyes that night saw only a man who had sold his soul for an empire that, without love, had become his own prison. 2 weeks after the engagement announcement, Aurora had become a shadow of herself. Grandma Eula watched her with growing concern as her granddaughter pretended to eat her morning oatmeal, her eyes lost in some distant point in the small kitchen. "My child, you need to react," said the elderly woman finally, sitting next to her granddaughter. "You can't let this pain consume you." "There's nothing to react to, Grandma," Aurora murmured, pushing the plate away. "They won, that's it." "Won?" Grandma Eula raised an eyebrow. "Who won what?" "That cruel woman managed to separate two hearts that loved each other, but that's not victory, it's cowardice." Aurora sighed. Mr. Nicholas made his choice. He chose the empire, the appropriate fiancé, the life he always had. I was just a distraction. "Nonsense," said Grandma Eula firmly. "I saw how you were after that storm. I saw the sparkle in your eyes, the way you whispered his name in your sleep. That wasn't distraction, it was true love. And true love doesn't die because cruel people make threats." At that moment, knocks on the door interrupted the conversation. Aurora frowned. Who would visit them at this hour? When she opened the door, she found a young, nervous man wearing a Grand Palace Hotel uniform. "Miss Aurora, my name is Raphael. I'm from the hotel's maintenance department. I need to talk." "Do you? It's about Mr. Nicholas." Aurora felt her heart race, but forced herself to keep her voice steady. "I have nothing to talk about him." "Please," insisted Raphael, looking nervously around. "It's important, very important." Grandma Eula appeared behind Aurora. "Let the boy in, child. Sometimes answers come from where we least expect them." Reluctantly, Aurora invited Raphael inside. He sat awkwardly in the small room, refusing the coffee offered by Grandma Eula. "Miss Aurora, I know you don't know me, but I've worked at the hotel for 3 years. I've always admired your kindness to all of us, lesser employees. You always treated everyone with respect." "Thank you, Raphael, but let me finish, please," he interrupted her. "I know what happened between you, and the boss, the whole hotel knows, and I know you were wronged." Aurora felt her cheeks burn. "Raphael, I'd rather not." "I have information," he said quickly, "about how those photos were taken, about who's really behind all of this." The silence that followed was tense. Aurora exchanged a look with Grandma Eula before sitting on the edge of the armchair. "Continue," she said finally. Raphael pulled a crumpled envelope from his pocket. "I was doing maintenance on the electrical system the night of the storm. I saw when the lights came back on. I saw all the movement. But I also saw something that no one else saw." He opened the envelope and pulled out several black and white photographs. "These are images from the hallway security cameras. Look here," he pointed to one of the photos. "This man with the professional camera hidden in the emergency staircase." Aurora studied the image. It was a man she didn't recognize, clearly positioned to photograph through the window of Nicholas's office. "Who is he?" she asked. "A private investigator, hired 3 days before the storm. And look at this." Raphael showed another photo. "Who's paying him?" The image showed the same man receiving an envelope of money. The person handing over the payment was facing away, but Aurora immediately recognized the expensive suit, the arrogant posture. "Marcus," she whispered. "Exactly." Mr. Nicholas's executive assistant. He hired the photographer. He organized everything. The storm was just an opportunity he knew how to take advantage of. Aurora felt anger start to boil in her chest. But why? Why would he do that? Raphael hesitated. That's more complicated. But I have a friend who works as a secretary at Sterling Hotels, London. She told me some things. He pulled a chair closer. Marcus isn't just an executive assistant. He's the illegitimate son of Mr. Nicholas's late father. He was never officially recognized, but he's always worked for the family, waiting for his chance to inherit something. My God, Grandma Eula murmured. Ms. Margaret promised him a significant stake in the company if he could control Mr. Nicholas, if he ensured that he married Victoria and stopped making impulsive choices. Aurora stood up abruptly, walking to the window. So it was all a setup from the beginning. No, miss, said Raphael gently. Mr. Nicholas's feelings for you are real. I saw how he looked at you, how he changed after you, started working near him. Marcus just took advantage of a situation that already existed. And why are you telling me this? Asked Aurora, turning to face him. Raphael blushed slightly. Because my younger sister died last year. Cancer. Mr. Nicholas paid for all her treatments, all the doctors, everything. He didn't even know me that well, but when he found out about the situation, he simply said that no employee of his should lose family for lack of money. Tears filled Aurora's eyes. That sounded exactly like something Nicholas would do. The kindness hidden behind the cold mask. He never knew that I found out it was him, continued Raphael. But I owe my sister's life to him. And seeing what they're doing to you two, it's not fair. Aurora looked at the photographs scattered on the table, proof of an elaborate conspiracy, of a betrayal that came from within Nicholas's own organization. He didn't know he was being manipulated by someone he trusted. What do you want me to do with this information? She asked. Fight, said Grandma Eula firmly, standing up. You have the truth in your hands, girl. Use it. But Grandma, even if I prove it was all a setup, that doesn't change the fact that Nicholas chose the Empire. He had the chance to defend me and he had a gun pointed to his head, interrupted Raphael. You saw how his aunt is. She wasn't bluffing about destroying the company. Thousands of jobs really would be at risk. Aurora closed her eyes, trying to process everything. Part of her wanted to take the evidence and confront Nicholas immediately. But another part was still too hurt by the rejection, by the way he had treated her in that hallway. There's one more thing, said Raphael hesitantly. The wedding is scheduled for next Saturday. Big event. All the tycoons of the country will be there, but what? My friend in London told me that Victoria Ashworth has other plans. She doesn't really want to marry Mr. Nicholas. Aurora frowned. What do you mean? She has a boyfriend in England, a bankrupt earl. The marriage to Mr. Nicholas is just to save her family's finances. After she gains access to the Sterling assets, she plans to divorce him and keep half of everything. The information hit Aurora like a lightning bolt. Nicholas wasn't just being blackmailed, he was being set up to be robbed. Do you have proof of this too? She asked. Raphael shook his head. No concrete proof, but my friend can get it. She has access to Victoria's personal emails. Aurora looked at Grandma Eula, who was watching her with hopeful eyes. Then she looked at Raphael, who had risked his own job to bring her this information. If I do this, she said slowly, if I fight for him, there's no guarantee that Nicholas will choose me in the end. He may still decide that we're from very different worlds. True, said Grandma Eula, taking her granddaughter's hands, but at least you'll know you fought, and he'll know the truth about who really loves him and who's trying to destroy him. Aurora took a deep breath, feeling something awaken inside her, a determination she hadn't felt since she left the hotel 2 weeks ago. "Raphael," she said firmly, "I need your friend to get that information about Victoria. And I need you to help me get into the wedding party." Raphael smiled for the first time since he had arrived. "Yes, ma'am, let's do this." "And Grandma," Aurora turned to Grandma Eula, "I think it's time for me to meet my father." Grandma Eula widened her eyes. "Aurora, are you sure?" "I am. If I'm going to fight for love, I need to make peace with my past first. I need to look into the eyes of the man who gave me life and decide for myself who I am." That night, while Aurora planned her strategy, across town, Nicholas Sterling was in his penthouse, looking at Victoria's engagement ring on the table. In a few days, he would marry a woman he didn't love, sealing the fate that others had chosen for him. But he didn't know that Aurora Mendez had decided to fight, and that the truth, as always, was about to come to light in an explosive way. The Tremembe Penitentiary Complex had never seemed as intimidating as it did on that Friday morning. Aurora firmly held Grandma Eula's hand as they passed through the metal detectors and security gates. After a 24-hour bus trip and a sleepless night in a cheap inn, they finally arrived at the moment that Aurora had avoided for her entire adult life. "You don't have to do this, my child," murmured Grandma Eula for the 10th time. "I need to, Grandma. I need to look into his eyes and decide if I'm the daughter of a criminal or just Aurora Mendez, the woman who loves Nicholas Sterling." When they called her name, Aurora stood up with trembling legs and followed the guard to the visiting room. Joaquim Mendez was sitting across the plastic table, his hands cuffed, his face marked by years of imprisonment. But when he raised his eyes and saw her, Aurora immediately recognized her own features, the same brown eyes, the same shape of the face. "Aurora?" His voice was hoarse with emotion. "My daughter, you came." Aurora sat down slowly, studying the man who had haunted her all her life. "I came to get answers." Joaquim lowered his head. "I deserve your anger. I deserve your hatred." "I didn't come here to hate you," said Aurora, surprisingly calmly. "I came to understand. Why did you do what you did? Why did you destroy so many lives?" Tears began to roll down Joaquim's aged face. "Because I was a coward. Your mother was sick. You needed things I couldn't give. And when the opportunity to make easy money appeared, I thought it would be just once. But it wasn't. It wasn't. One lie led to another. One crime led to the next. And when I realized what I had become, it was too late. The families I cheated, the money I stole. I couldn't stop because I couldn't face what I had done." Aurora remained silent for long moments. "You know that Mom died believing that you had abandoned us because you didn't love us anymore?" Joaquim sobbed. "Grandma Eula did the right thing. It was better for you to think that I was a coward than to know that I was a criminal. And now, what do you think now, after 15 years in here?" Joaquim raised his eyes to meet hers. "That you've become the most beautiful and strong woman I've ever seen. That your mother would be proud, and that I wasted the only thing that really mattered in life, being the father of a daughter like you." Aurora felt something loosen in her chest. It wasn't complete forgiveness, but it was understanding. "I'm not you," she said firmly. "Your mistakes don't define me. Your choices aren't mine." "No, they aren't," agreed Joaquim. "You're everything I could have been, but never had the courage to be." When Aurora left the prison an hour later, she felt different, lighter, stronger, more complete. She had looked her past in the eye and decided that her future would be written by herself. "And now," asked Grandma Eula on the bus back to New York City, "now I'm going to fight for the man I love." The Grand Palace Hotel was unrecognizable on Saturday night. Exotic flowers covered every surface. Crystal chandeliers were installed, especially for the occasion, and the country's most important guests paraded their jewels and designer dresses through the decorated halls. The Sterling Ashworth wedding was the social event of the year. Nicholas was in his room, adjusting his tuxedo for the third time, when Marcus entered without knocking. "It's almost time, Mr. Sterling. The guests are arriving. The bride is getting ready." "Marcus?" Nicholas interrupted him. "Have you ever wondered if I'm doing the right thing?" The executive assistant hesitated for a fraction of a second. "You're doing the only thing possible, the responsible thing." "Responsible," Nicholas repeated bitterly. "My mother used to say that responsibility without love is just a gilded cage." "Your mother didn't have an empire to protect," replied Marcus. Nicholas studied him for a moment. There was something different about Marcus lately, a poorly disguised satisfaction that bothered him. But before he could question him, knocks on the door interrupted them. "Come in," said Nicholas. To his absolute surprise, Raphael from the maintenance department nervously entered carrying an envelope. "Mr. Sterling, sorry to bother you, but I have something very important to show you." "Raphael, what are you doing here? And how did you get past security?" "Sir, please, just look at this." Raphael extended the envelope with trembling hands. Nicholas frowned, but opened the envelope. Inside were the photographs from the security cameras, clearly showing Marcus paying the private investigator, the images of the photographer hiding, and a series of printed emails. "What is this?" asked Nicholas, his voice getting dangerously low. "Marcus," Raphael pointed to the photographs, "hired someone to photograph you and Miss Aurora. It was all planned." Nicholas raised his eyes to Marcus, who had paled completely. "Is this true?" "Sir, I can explain." "Is it true?" Nicholas roared. Marcus straightened his shoulders, assuming a defiant posture. "Yes, and I'd do it again. Someone needed to protect you from yourself." "Protect me? From that woman, from that insignificant maid who was ruining everything you built." Nicholas advanced towards Marcus, his fists clenched. "You betrayed my trust. You violated my privacy. You destroyed—" "I saved your empire," Marcus shouted, "and I saved you from making the biggest mistake of your life." "The biggest mistake of my life," said Nicholas slowly, "was trusting you." Raphael cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Sterling, there's more. About Miss Victoria." He handed over another envelope. Nicholas opened it and found a series of emails between Victoria and a man named Charles Worthington. The emails were explicit about her plans: to marry Nicholas, gain access to the Sterling assets, divorce after 2 years, and divide the fortune with her true love. "My God," Nicholas murmured. "Everyone was using me." "Not everyone," said a soft voice from the door. Nicholas turned and his heart stopped. Aurora was in the doorway, wearing a simple but elegant navy blue dress, her hair loose, framing her determined face. She was more beautiful than he remembered, but there was something different about her, a strength, a confidence that wasn't there before. "Aurora," he whispered her name like a prayer. "Hello, Nicholas," she said, entering the room. "Sorry to interrupt, but we need to talk." Marcus tried to interpose. "Mr. Sterling, the ceremony starts in 15 minutes. You can't—" "You're fired," said Nicholas without taking his eyes off Aurora. "Get out of my sight before I call security." Marcus left muttering threats about Margaret and the consequences. Raphael discreetly withdrew, closing the door and leaving them alone. "You came," said Nicholas, as if he couldn't believe it. "I came to fight for you," Aurora replied simply, "because I discovered that some things are worth fighting for, regardless of the consequences." "Aurora, Let me talk first," she interrupted him. "I know about Marcus. I know about Victoria. I know about all the blackmail they did against you, and I know that you chose to protect your employees and your empire instead of fighting for us." Nicholas lowered his head. I had no choice. You did, said Aurora firmly. You always had a choice. But you chose with fear instead of choosing with love. And now, why did you come here? Why did you show me all this? Aurora approached him, stopping a few inches away. Because I love you. Because despite everything that happened, despite the pain, despite the humiliation, I love you, and I know you love me too. Aurora. And because, she continued, I discovered that we're not from such different worlds after all. We both lost our mothers. We both carry pains from the past. We both had to be stronger than we wanted to be. The only difference is that you had money to hide your scars, and I had to carry mine in plain sight. Nicholas looked at her as if he was seeing her for the first time. And your father? You found out about... I spoke with him yesterday, said Aurora calmly. I looked into the eyes of the man who gave me life and decided that his mistakes don't define me. I'm Aurora Mendez, the woman who loves you, not the daughter of a convict. Nicholas reached out and gently touched her face. You've become even stronger. I had to become stronger, because I decided that if I'm going to lose you, it's going to be fighting, not hiding. From downstairs came the sounds of the orchestra preparing, of the guests settling in, of a wedding about to begin. Nicholas, said Aurora, I didn't come here to beg. I came here to give you a real choice. You can go down those stairs and marry Victoria, protect your empire, live the life that others planned for you, or you can choose the imperfect, complicated, real love that exists between us. And if I choose you? He asked, his voice hoarse. What if we lose everything? Then we'll build something new, said Aurora without hesitation. Something of our own. Maybe we won't have an empire, but we'll have each other. Nicholas pulled her into his arms. And when he kissed her, it was with all the passion and desperation of a man who had almost lost the love of his life. They kissed, as if they were going to die, as if it were the last and first time, as if nothing else in the world mattered. I love you, he murmured against her lips. I love you so much that it hurt to breathe without you. Then choose me, she whispered. Choose me and let's face everything together. Nicholas looked into her eyes and saw his future reflected in them. Not a future of guaranteed luxury and gilded loneliness, but a future of challenges, growth, true love, and imperfect but real happiness. I choose you, he said firmly. Always you. 20 minutes later, the distinguished guests of the Grand Palace Hotel witnessed the most memorable spectacle of their social lives. Nicholas Sterling, at the altar decorated with white roses, interrupted the ceremony at the exact moment the priest asked if there was any impediment to the wedding. I do, he said, his voice echoing through the silent hall. I can't marry Victoria, because I'm in love with another woman. The murmur that followed was deafening. Victoria dropped her bouquet, Margaret turned livid with rage, and the guests whispered scandalized to each other. Nicholas! Shouted Margaret, standing up. Have you gone insane? No, Aunt. I finally regained my sanity, said Nicholas, stepping down from the altar. Victoria, I apologize, but I know about Charles Worthington. I know about your real plans. This wedding would be a farce for both of us. Victoria paled, but quickly recovered. I don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about, replied Nicholas. And Margaret, as for your investments, do what you want. I'd rather rebuild everything from scratch with love than maintain a soulless empire. He turned to the crowd of shocked guests. I apologize for the inconvenience. The bar is open. Enjoy the party. But I have a woman to find. Nicholas ran through the hotel hallways until he found Aurora in the small backyard garden where she was nervously awaiting the outcome of his choice. So, she asked when he appeared, breathless and with his tuxedo disheveled. So, he said, kneeling on the grass and taking the engagement ring out of his pocket. Aurora Mendes, will you marry me? Not for money, not for status, but for the imperfect and real love we have? Aurora knelt down too, tears running freely down her face. Yes, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, yes, yes. When they kissed in the garden, illuminated only by the stars, it was the truest kiss of their lives. Not a kiss stolen during a storm, but a kiss of promise, of future, of conscious choices and true love. 6 months later, Aurora Sterling, she had decided to keep the name after the wedding, opened the doors of the first Sterling Community Hotel, a joint project of her and Nicholas to offer decent and affordable lodging for working families. Visiting the city, the hotel didn't have the luxury of the traditional Sterlings, but it had something more valuable: purpose. Nicholas had lost the investments of the family and the Ashworths, as Margaret had promised. But he discovered that rebuilding with Aurora by his side was more exciting than managing an inherited empire. Together, they created a new version of Sterling hotels, smaller, more humane, focused on serving real people instead of just elites. "Do you regret it?" asked Aurora one night, as they reviewed the plans for the second community hotel in their small but cozy home. "Regret what?" asked Nicholas, pulling her onto his lap, "having chosen the clumsy maid instead of the empire." Nicholas laughed, kissing her neck. "My love, I didn't choose the clumsy maid. I chose the bravest, strongest, and most real woman I've ever known. The empire was just an illusion. You are my reality." Across the room, Grandma Eula smiled. As she knitted, she had moved into their house after the wedding, and Nicholas treated her like the grandmother he had never had. That night, as on every other night, the small house was filled with something that no empire could buy: true love, chosen family, and the certainty that sometimes the best things in life are born from the most unlikely accidents. And when Aurora occasionally tripped or dropped something, Nicholas just laughed and kissed her, remembering that it was exactly her adorable clumsiness that had brought them together in that storm that changed their lives forever. Love had won, imperfect and real, exactly as it should be.